Alan Dershowitz has been called one of the most prominent and consistent defenders of civil liberties in America by Politico, and he's also been kind of referred to as basically a lion when it comes to defending civil liberties. But I also got to be honest, I've always thought of him as more of a liberal Democrat who's good friends with former President Bill Clinton. And so then when I start to see Alan Dershowitz now is one of the strongest defenders of President Donald Trump in the midst of this whole circus that's been known as impeachment over the last few months, it's really great to get a chance to catch up with him here on the show this morning. Alan Dershowitz, great to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure to be on. Thank you. I appreciate the fact that you've been my fan since the 1990s. I've been doing this since the 1960s. You know, people forget that even though I am a liberal Democrat and a friend of the Clintons, I actually took a civil liberties position even when President Nixon was impeached. I was then on the national board of the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, and I opposed them favoring the impeachment. I thought they should be working on defending Nixon's civil liberties. And when they named Nixon as an unindicted co-conspirator as a civil libertarian, I was very concerned about that, because when you're named as an unindicted co-conspirator, it means you can't defend yourself. It's like being impeached without having a trial in the Senate. So I've been consistent on my views of impeachment since the 1970s. And for me, it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican president or a Democrat president. I oppose the impeachment of Bill Clinton. I oppose the impeachment of Donald Trump. I favor the impeachment of Nixon, but not the way in which the process unfolded.
Well, I know you've got a new book out that we definitely want to talk about, especially after Hollywood took a beating from Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes the other night.
Well-deserved beating, yeah.
Yeah. The new book is Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. I definitely want to talk about that here in just a second. But first, I just got to get your take on this impeachment circus against the president. You know, I thought that okay, maybe when Congress gets back in session, that then the House would transmit the articles of impeachment to the Senate. Speaker Pelosi is still holding on to these articles of impeachment. What's your take on the latest saga of this circus of impeachment?
Well, the two grounds for impeachment are not constitutional. They clearly violate the Constitution. They are an abuse of the power of Congress. The framers had very strict criteria for impeachment: treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors. This doesn't fit any of those categories. The concept of abuse of power is something every president since John Adams has been accused of. And obstruction of Congress. There's no obstruction of Congress when you demand that the courts decide whether or not a subpoena is valid. That's the way our system of checks and balances operates. So I think this impeachment is unconstitutional. I do think that the Senate has to get the articles of impeachment quickly. Hamilton in Federalist number 65 talked about the need to have a quick trial because you don't want it hanging over the head of an innocent person. And for a guilty person, it just gives them more time to do things that they've been accused of. So the notion of having a speedy trial is obviously implicit in the entire procedure for impeachment and removal.
In fact, speaking of impeachment, you actually wrote the book back in, I think, 1998, Sexual McCarthyism, Clinton Star in the Emerging Constitutional Crisis. So an interesting footnote there on the impeachment debate. Well, your new book, Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. And I think you even recognize this in your book here, that the Me2 movement has generally been a force for good, but as with many good movements, it's being exploited by some bad people for personal profit. Talk about how you see the Me Too movement not only being a force for good, but how it's been exploited and being exploited. I mean, especially with the attacks on the false attacks on Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh and other things like that.
Well, first of all, when I wrote the book, a lot of my friends said, don't write it because, it'll just keep the accusations against you in the public light. If you don't write it, these accusations will go away. I don't want it to go away. I want to disprove them categorically. I want to see my false accusers go to prison. That's what should happen to people who make false accusations. In my case, I never met the woman. I never heard of her. I have emails that she tried to suppress in which she admits never meeting me. I have a manuscript of a book in which she admits never meeting me. And she was pressured by her lawyers for money, according to her best friend, to make the false accusation against me. So I'm not going to arrest or stop until justice is done. We're talking about not only American law, we're talking about the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness. This is a woman who violated the Ten Commandments, according to her friend, with the assistance and pressure of her lawyers. So the Me Too movement is good. I think it's very important for predators to be held accountable. But I think it was Eric Hoffa, the philosopher, who once said, every movement starts as a cause, it then becomes a business, and ultimately a racket. And we're seeing it moving to the racket phase now as exploitive women accuse men they've never even met in order to get money, because today, if you're accused, you're guilty. I'll give you an example. There's an organization in New York called the 92nd Street Y, which I speak at every year for the last 25 years. This year, they wouldn't allow me to speak because they said, you've been accused. I said, yeah, but you know I didn't do it. And they said, no, we know you didn't do it, but you've been accused, and that's enough. We don't want trouble. That's the attitude that people have. And I grew up in McCarthyism in the 1950s, and that was the attitude then as well, and I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it as hard as I fought McCarthyism, and we're in court. I'm suing my accuser for defamation, and we'll have the thing heard by a jury, and I'm confident the jury will see the facts as they exist truthfully. So the book, you can buy the book for Kindle on $2, not much of an investment, and read the whole story, and I have all the documents that prove that this woman lied and made it up. I have the emails, I have the suppressed manuscript, I have everything in there. And the reason it's important to read the book is it could happen to you. It could happen to your son. It can happen to your husband. It can happen to your father, your uncle. Anybody can be falsely accused. I mean, I've lived a life of complete moral rectitude. I've been married to the same woman for 36 years since the day this woman came along. I've had sex with one woman, my wife. I've never done anything wrong sexually, and yet I stand accused, and people believe it. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Alan, I love this piece in Politico, or at least the headline of it here. Apparently, all these liberal folks, your old friends at Harvard, your friends at Martha's Vineyard, and elsewhere, they're asking this question: what happened to Alan Dershowitz? But then Politico kind of says, or maybe the question is, what happened to everybody else here? So thanks for being with us.
There's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I passed the shoe on the other foot test. That is, it doesn't matter to me whether it's Democrat or Republican, somebody I voted for, somebody voted against. I'm going to defend their civil liberties, but many of my colleagues don't pass the shoe on the other foot test. If this were Hillary Clinton who were being impeached, if she were the president, they would be taking exactly the opposite point of view. They'd be supporting my position now. But because it's Donald Trump, they have a completely different position. Let me give you an example. My colleague and friend Larry Tribe, when Clinton was impeached, he wrote and spoke that you can't indict or prosecute a sitting president. And now that Trump's president, he suddenly became woke, and he realized he was wrong back then, and now he says, yes, you can indict a sitting president. Well, I don't change my mind about things like that. I've been studying the Constitution for 60 years or more, and I know it very well, and I know the cases, and I'm sticking to my consistent positions, no matter who the president is, no matter whether I voted for him, no matter whether I'll vote for him for his reelection. Those are not the issues. The issues are the Constitution, the rule of law, and those are consistent. They don't change with party affiliation.
Well, and I'm almost reminded, too, going back to, you get, Alan Dershowitz has this new book out, Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. Oh, but back on impeachment, too, the other thing that's remarkable to me is all these so-called civil libertarians who opposed the Patriot Act when we were using it to go after terrorists, all of a sudden don't care that we're abusing the FISA courts to spy on political campaigns. And yeah, if the shoe on other foot had been Hillary Clinton, I think there'd be outrage on both sides of the aisle. But yet we aren't seeing that from some of the so-called civil libertarians out there.
I agree with you.
So your book, Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. When I was a kid, the book To Kill a Mockingbird was pretty much required reading. And it's an incredible book, incredible movie. But in this day and age, it's like, well, the folks with the pitchforks show up and demand somebody's head, and the media and everybody else, we're supposed to just cave to the pitchfork crowd every time, whether it's the Covington Catholic kids or Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh or whatever. But
no,
especially
it's not every time. It depends on who is carrying the pitchforks and who they're going against. You still get civil libertarians when protected minorities are accused or liberal Democrats are accused. It's just they don't believe the Constitution applies to Brett Kavanaugh. They don't believe who was the great German theologian who said, when they came for the Jews, we didn't object because we weren't Jewish. When they came for the communists, we didn't object because we weren't communists. When they came for the trade union people, they didn't object because we weren't trade union people. Then when they came for us, there was nobody left to object. And that's what's happening today. You go after Kavanaugh, totally wrongly. You go after other people. And then ultimately they came after me. I mean, I'm a liberal Democrat. But since I'm now supporting President Trump's constitutional rights, they're coming after me ferociously. And if you think this accusation and the way it's being handled doesn't relate to my support for Trump's rights, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. The New Yorker commissioned a hit piece on me, going back to my first marriage, telling lies about me, in order to silence me on Trump and to silence my voice on Israel, because the New Yorker hates Israel. They hate Benjamin Netanyahu. They hate Donald Trump. And as a result of that, they hate me. And so they, had a completely defamatory article, which I fought against and answered and responded to. But there are efforts to silence my voice on Trump and on Israel through these allegations of sexual misconduct, which are totally false.
Yeah,
and the reason why people should read the book, as I said, $2 on Kindle. It's easy to get, right, on Amazon. It can happen to anybody. I mean, I've lived a completely good life when it came to my sexual propriety. And I don't flirt. I don't go out with them. I don't have affairs. I don't do anything of that kind. And yet they came after me with a woman I never met. If they could do that to me, your kid in college is very vulnerable, and your uncle who works in a law firm is very vulnerable. So we have to attack this head on and make sure false accusations and the people who make them are punished. That's the only way to deter false accusations. Otherwise, there's every good reason to make them, because most of these cases settle. I have a case now that I'm working on for a guy completely, totally innocent. He wasn't in the state where the allegation apparently occurred, yet he's prepared to settle the case because he doesn't want his name in the papers as being accused, because even though he's innocent, he knows the accusation will destroy his business. So he's prepared to shell out money to settle the case, even though he's completely innocent. We're seeing more and more and more of that going on.
Well, we just got a new case out of that has connections here in Montana. Michael Gogan, a well-known venture capitalist, especially in the high-tech arena, lives in northwest Montana, very philanthropic. He had claims that were leveled against him, and he got defamed in the media. Well, now, this is, I think, the second ruling. A California judge ruled that this woman was trying to extort him and made false claims against him. And so there's been case after case where we've seen this pattern happen.
Right. I mean, I recorded a conversation with my accuser's lawyer where the lawyer admitted that she's wrong, simply wrong, and that it was impossible for her to have been in the same places that she said she met me. You'd think that would be the end of the matter when her own lawyer admits it, when she admits it in emails, when an FBI investigation by the former head of the FBI conclusively proves that she made up the story. You'd think that would be the end of it, but it's not. As long as there's an accusation, you're guilty.
Alan Dershowitz, author of a new book, Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. I know you got to run. I greatly appreciate your time this morning. If I could throw one more question your way, since
sure,
you mentioned our great friends in Israel and, the constant drumbeat of anti-Israel propaganda out of our mainstream news media. And yet this propaganda that we're seeing supporting Iran by the mainstream media these last couple of days, to me, it's just absolutely outrageous. The same regime in Tehran that booted the foreign press out of their country just a few weeks ago so they could slaughter innocent, unarmed protesters. Right. Now the media happily jaunts back in there to broadcast Iranian propaganda.
Right. My favorite is when the intersectionality people have gay people and transgender people supporting Iran. In Iran, they throw gay people off the roof. They strangle to death transgender people, and yet because Iran is an enemy of America, an enemy of Israel, radicals on the left support Iran, and it's just it's so absurd. I mean, Israel is a democracy, America's greatest military ally and supporter. The Iranians are now threatening to destroy Israel because the United States killed a terrorist. I think Americans should all stand behind Israel and stand behind the United States has very, very positive relationship with Israel.
Well, I can tell you, the folks in Montana. In fact, if you go to the Crow Indian Reservation in Montana, you'll see the flag of Israel flying high alongside the flag of the United States.
Well,
and
my wife
alongside
and daughter just recently came from Montana. We had the most wonderful vacation hiking, and it's a great state, and everybody who lives there should be proud. That's one of the most beautiful places in the world.
That it is. Well, that's great. Where'd they go? Or if you don't want to share publicly, that's okay too.
We're just one of the national parks, but
yeah, great time.
I had a great time. Yeah,
I'll bet. All right, Alan Dershowitz. Well, if you make it back to Montana, you know where to come find us. We'd love to have you again. Thanks for being with us. Okay.
Sure. Bye.